Nikola capital T Tesla. You know him, you love him, you should at least appreciate him. I mean, he championed something called alternating current, or AC for short. Get it? Like electrical short. Without that, we would still have shit that looked like this. So clearly he's a pretty smart guy, and thank God he won the AC-DC battle against Edison. The man electrocuted an elephant. Who the fuck does that? Here's the thing though, Tesla had some weird ideas, like bonkers, and probably impossible, or at least way before his time. You've got wireless energy transmission, not Wi-Fi, not the same thing, like electrical power for your house, but without any wires. Pretty cool, but what about an earthquake machine? Or perhaps a remote control navy? I don't mean like a full navy of tiny remote control boats. Like imagine a battleship controlled through radio waves. Pretty powerful stuff, but not as powerful as a literal death ray. Good thing that none of these things were ever actually invented. Due to economic, political, or even just plain technological limits at the time, he could just never make it happen. But what if he did? And this is the premise of Close to the Sun. What if Tesla was incredibly successful? What would happen if he didn't give up at the Wardenclyffe Tower? In Close to the Sun, he goes on to fulfill all of his ideas, establishes a ship that acts as a pseudo-independent nation of scientists and inventors that push the limits of human knowledge. When the main character arrives on this ship, by a smaller radio-controlled boat no less, they are greeted with something hauntingly similar to another game that I played semi-recently. The whole ship is abandoned and in ruins. The atmosphere is unsettling and ominous. You are forced to search through the ship for your sister who summoned you here, but the scene of the ghostly ship becomes more and more unsettling as you start finding mangled corpses and visions of phantoms. Tesla may have been successful, but it appears he's gone too far. That's pretty spooky, right? Unfortunately, the best parts of this game are the parts that remind me of other games. Right off the bat, we've got Bioshock. I mean, it's all over the marketing. There are some clear visual references, and it even takes place at sea in a city-like settlement that was founded on the idea of being an independent utopia that eventually collapsed under its own hubris. But for me, it was one step further. When I first played Bioshock, I was in love with the first few hours because it was a pretty much straight-up horror game. I thought that's what the whole game was, so I was pretty disappointed when it transformed itself into an action game partway through. I always wanted a full game to be inspired by those first few hours, and here I have it. Close to the Sun is that game. It's also reminiscent of the same subgenre that Outlast and Amnesia inhabit, where you explore a spooky place, read documents that enrich the world, solve some pretty basic puzzles, and get chased by whatever threat is in the world. So you've got a really cool premise, in a world where Nikola Tesla was successful, in a game that plays like Amnesia, but is also visually and thematically inspired by Bioshock. It sounds foolproof. Hell, I've just sold the game to myself again even though I just beat it. So why did this game disappoint me? I think it's time we got to some spoilers. I think that it nailed the premise, and I think that it nailed the Bioshock aspects. I think that the problem lies in the execution of the gameplay itself. I mentioned how you solve puzzles and you are also chased by a threat. Well, those are completely separate parts of the game. They never mix. And the chase sequences are so over the top that you can immediately tell that you'll never be forced to solve a puzzle during one, and you can clearly see that there's never going to be a threat during a puzzle. This diffused all the tension that the atmosphere worked so hard to create. I didn't feel a sense of urgency to solve any puzzles, and I never felt threatened while being chased by a killer. Not to beat a dead horse, but that's a huge problem. At this point, all that there was left was the premise and the Bioshock influence, but no matter how cool those things are, there's a danger that they'll fall flat if the world isn't intriguing to interact with. For instance, the Bioshock charm wore off for me. So I was being solely carried by my interest in the historical figure of Nikola Tesla, as well as the narrative, I suppose. I wasn't particularly struck by that either. It wasn't really bad, but it was incredibly predictable, and I didn't really feel motivated by it. The last nail in the coffin for me was the main threat. There was a lot of really interesting stuff about the political implications of free energy. There's some really cool stuff about time and the single electron theory, which is the theory that every electron in our universe is the same electron traveling back and forth through time. There were so many cool philosophical, scientific, and psychologically terrifying things that they could have gone with. Did the scientists do something that they couldn't live with and went mad with guilt and rage? Was there a political angle with Edison and sabotage? Did they open a rift in time itself and are now caught in an infinite loop, driving them to insanity? Did Tesla dig too deep in the science mines of Moria and release the theoretical Balrog? Well, these last two are actually kind of true. And what do we get? Time goblins. This game could have been so good, but it flew too close to the sun, and it fell from greatness.